Welcome to this live streamed event called The Promise of Ingenuity, brought to you by your friends at the Rosendale Theatre in lovely Rosendale, New York. This is the second of 3 programs in the 2021 Science on Screen series. Our next event, entitled Mysteries of the Brain, will be streamed again live next month on April 28th. It focuses on a film called The Awakening, a really great film in which Robin Williams plays Dr. Oliver Sacks. In tonight's program, we are going to focus on the early life of William Kwankamba using a feature film called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind and a documentary called William and the Windmill. I'd like to offer a special shout out to the real William, who sent us greetings that you can find on the website, and thank him. I'm sure you'll all enjoy that. I'm Wendy Saul, a member of the Rosendale Theatre Board. However, since I'm also one of the panelists, in a moment, I'm going to turn the program over to Alan Newman, a retired scientist and a member of the Science on Screen Advisory Group. But before doing that, I want to thank the 2 wizards behind the screen who are making this streaming possible, Justin Peony and Pam Cray. The Rosendale Theatre is also clearly and deeply grateful to Coolidge Corner and the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation for initiating and sustaining the Science on Screen program even during the pandemic. We are pleased and proud to be one of this year's 37 grant recipients from all across the United States. And I can't conclude this introduction without saying, in the words of PBS, that this program, and actually everything at the Rosendale Theatre, relies on support from viewers like you. We encourage you to hit that donate button anytime you're so inclined. This program, The Promise of Ingenuity, was first called 5 Ways of Looking at 2 Films. The 5 ways are represented by our guests here tonight, whose bios are elaborated on our website. But because we're an informal lot, we will refer to one another by first names. So without further ado, let me turn the program over to Alan.
Thank you, Wendy. My job tonight, because we have a large panel with very different expertises, I will do my best to direct questions toward each of the panelists to give them a chance to speak. Before I do that, I sort of wanted to put the film in context and talk a little bit about William's home country, Malawi. Malawi is a landlocked country located in what's considered South Central Africa. If you think of Africa as the United States, Malawi would be Tennessee turned sideways. That is, it's a country that is tall and narrow. And South Africa would play the role of Florida and Texas. My analogy really fails because Africa, from our perspective, is upside down. That is, the bottom part of it is temperate, more like our middle Atlantic states, while the northern part of Africa huddles the equator. Malawi is a former British colony and currently, I'm happy to say, has a democratically elected government. The population is a little over 19 million, of whom 85% still live in rural areas, as William's family is one of them. By international standards, the country is underdeveloped and still relies very heavily on agriculture and international aid for its economics. And not surprisingly, life expectancy is pretty low. So I'd like to continue to put the film in some context and direct my first question to Shereen and Joanne. In the film, school is a very important actually in both films, the school is a very important element in William's development. But the film talks about the costs of going to school. And what's that about? And how do African schools differ from American schools? Shereen, maybe Shereen should start that one off and Joanne goes second.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan, and hello, everybody. Perhaps I can sort of answer the question in two parts. What are the costs? I think education, like anywhere in the world, is a doorway to a whole lot of possibility, right? And so the investment in education on the African continent, in Southern Africa, in Malawi specifically, is also seen through that lens. Education is your way to something better. I think that education is also intimately linked to the meaning of the colonial project. So, you know, in Southern Africa specifically, if that's what we're talking about, you know, colonialism came with mission schools, right? And the investment in education was part and parcel of that, including, you know, the value of education by people who were fighting for liberation and freedom. So I think there's a very deep sense of the meaning of education that, you know, and the investment in education in Malawi. But what are the costs, right? The differential costs, I think, are, you know, the difference between private schools and state schools, and the meaning of those two different types of educational models being resourced in very, very different ways that then ultimately provide you, you know, with access to a whole set of things, be it, you know, extracurricular activities, be it access to libraries, be it access to a broader community that supports, right, and nourishes your education broader than the curriculum. Whereas, you know, state-sponsored schools are sometimes strapped in terms of cash, because of the meaning of states, the meaning of national budgets, and the way that resources are managed in countries and contexts where, you know, poverty is high, where, you know, corruption is potentially high, and where real choices are being made about where resources go. But there are other costs. And if we take a rural context like rural Malawi, the costs are, do I send my child to school, or does that child help with the labor on the farm, in the fields, to be able to ensure that people have food, right? To be able to ensure that families and communities are sustained. And the deeper costs then become gendered, right? So do we send the boy child to school because of the way patriarchy and the way, you know, that works? Or do we send the girl child to school? And 9 times out of 10, you know, because of mainstream systems, it's often the boy child who goes to school and the girl child has to stay home to take care of the reproductive labor. So I'll leave it there and hand to Joanne, given time.
I think Shereen has said it all. And, you know, that context exists despite a global commitment. There was in 2000 something called the Millennium Development Goals, which are now called the Sustainable Development Goals, which was and one of the main commitments of that was universal basic free education. And so, as Shereen said, even when education is free, the associated costs, whether it's school uniforms or books or the cost of transport, et cetera, you know, will intervene and interfere with a child's ability to go to school. And if it's a girl, even more so. And in the film, we were talking earlier about the fact that as challenged as William was to get to school and to get to use the resources of his school, his sister was even more challenged and in fact got married early and was not able to go to school. So the film was really very, I think, important and illustrative of what happens in a rural area, in a poor community.
So kids are really lost along the line because of these costs, in the sense that they drop out and are forced to go to work or marry, as the case may be.
Exactly. And when a community or a family is in crisis, then your choices become even more constrained, right? So is it food? is it medicine or is it school? And it is sometimes an either or.
So, and also shows, I think, the interlinkages with environmental crises, because that's the other thing that comes out so strongly in that film, is the way the environment has such a profound impact on choice.
Okay, and I want to get back to that issue, but I want to stick with the school issue for a moment, and direct a question to Andrew. You know, the film really celebrates William as a remarkable person. But I think about what happens in the United States. We know that kids, for example, who have the privilege of living near Purdue University or being able to go to the Bronx School of Science, really have amazing opportunities to learn science and technology, AP classes, robotic competitions, science fairs, and so on. But even in the United States, there are Williams out in rural areas, or maybe in inner city ghettos, or in isolated regions, or surrounded by poor schools that potentially could get lost. Is there a system by which US schools sort of find their Williams, these sort of tinkerers and kids with the native interest in STEM?
We're working on it. So I'm the lead teacher at Purdue Polytechnic High School, which was founded to address exactly need. And our school is full of Williams. You can learn more about 5 of them in the film, The William Challenge, which screened along as part of this series. Our hypothesis is that if our emphasis on student choice and voice, as well as breaking some of the things that we know don't work in traditional schools, things like a master schedule, things like the bells, will allow us to connect students to teachers, to learning experiences that allow them to see themselves as innovators. And so that's what we do. This past week, we offered 520 unique learning experiences for our 543 learners. And these are things like sumo bots, where students are learning CAD and building robots to push each other off a table. Everything from that to zero waste cafeteria. What's it look like to rethink how school lunch is served to be more responsible in the climate? And so the thinking is that students engaging in these projects over the course of their 4 years at our school, at the end of the day, the innovations that they're making are great, but they're getting 4 years of practice as innovators. And we think that's going to make the difference.
Do you see a dichotomy between sort of the tinkerers and the folks who do well on tests, or are they one and the same?
The tinkerers and the folks who do well on the tests. Tough question. I think of the 543 students, we have 543 different learning approaches. And of those, there are some that are great at tests, some that are natural tinkerers. But at the end of the day, we're just preparing students for jobs that don't exist yet. And, you and Wendy really internalize this with me. Who you are, you're going to be sitting down, listening to a doctor tell you something or reading something in the newspaper. And you need to have the skills necessary to develop understanding of that unknown thing that there's no way we could teach all of that in school. And so that's what we're working on.
All right, interesting answer. I want to direct the next question to Wendy. One of the heroes of this, of the film, is the library, where William finds the book that it inspires him to make the Windmill. And I wonder to what extent a good library can compensate for a poor school.
Yeah, so libraries are incredibly important in my mind, but if kids don't have the basic literacy, they won't make much sense out of a library. The other problem is that the testing environment in most of the countries in Africa where I've worked is so dominant. The interest in reading for pleasure has been relegated to an interest in doing well on the test. And for good reason, frankly. I mean, if you want to get out of the mess, the test is what will help you get out. I was once working with a group of kids and I put down 3 books in front of them. One was this beautifully illustrated 4-color, gorgeous stories about African heroes. And the second one was a book written in their own national language about the situations that would describe their own lives. And the third one was this dog-eared, stupid test preparation book. And I said, so if you could have any one of these books to take home, which one would you take? And they all wanted the test prep book. It was painful. But what I will say one other thing. When I was interviewing Donnie and he was talking about coming to the US, one of the things that he mentioned was how overwhelmed he was with the library resources that we have available. And I know exactly that feeling that he's talking about.
And actually, that's a good introduction to my next question, and that is to Donnie. And as someone who grew up in Indonesia, I'm curious on your perspective on how Indonesian schools compare to what we've heard about African schools and what you know of American schools.
Well, thank you so much. Before answering, really thank you so much for being invited to this forum. Like what Wendy mentioned about my experience with the library, it was really an eye-opening when I got here 1993, and it was just the University of Pittsburgh Library. And next to it was another library by the Carnegie Library. So the two are just one opposite another one. And I can just cross from one library to another library. So in my country, we do have library, but I never thought that the library would be so big. And then so, with so many, the number of volumes of books are amazing. The school system in my country, I think, is also very similar to what happened in the United States, although in matters of cost and finance, perhaps is different. Yeah? I had the opportunity, or had the luxury of getting into the state schools, which is cheaper. But still, as you can tell, we still need to pay for other things. I remember the most expensive one was the English. Learning English was really expensive at that time. And then the other things that are also expensive was of course on the science. Yeah. Comparing to what happened when I see in the movie about the schools, in some areas in my country is somewhat can be related to that. Recently, I had a project with some faculty here in the United States, a project in Papua, the West Papua. Papua is a very remote, not remote, but the biggest island in Indonesia. So, Indonesia has a lot of islands, 13,000 islands. One of them is Papua. We had a chance to study, to help out schools in the area. I mean, it was not as the condition is still much better with a school in Africa, I believe. But there is a lot of stretch between what's going on in the capital city and in that area. So it was an eye-opening for me as well to see that, oh my goodness, we still have a lot of homeworks to do. So that's and then so this is what I see in this in the movie especially is part of it I was not surprised, but also it's still something that is educating me in the sense that we had a lot of challenges to to overcome, basically.
Are Indonesian students interested in STEM, or?
Oh, yeah.
So it's not a problem to recruit students?
That's up to now. I think that's still something that students are. I think there is a lot of a good balance in that sense. People are trying to students going to the STEMs area, and in that, even in that remote Papua island, we still get feedback or a report from them, and kids are very interested in STEM. So it's not the only problem. Is again facilities, and how to introduce the concept, the learning experience itself. So go back to your questions about which one, between the kids who are good in tests and the kids who are good in this practical thinking. That reminds me to what my chair in my school typically use in his introduction to what the engineering school, in comparing between Albert Einstein and Tesla. The two are two different extreme people. One is using experimental hands-on, experiments, and the other one would be using mental experiments. So our students as basically are in those areas. We just need to find out. In my language would be the button to turn. We have to find out the right button to turn. And that happened in Papua. We found out that the kids are there is more effective to use the hands-on. So we last time we introduced a way of learning science and STEM using a mixed mode instead of reading and then doing exercise and math in class, but they are mixing it with experience in the market and then in the field. Basically, the government kind of protesting that because we didn't be doing something experiments, but the teachers over there like it, so it kept going until now. So it's good.
All right, thank you. So I'm going to go back to something that Joanne and Shereen raised, and talk about the role of women in Malawi and in the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. What role can they play, and do they play, in changing their societies?
Thanks, Alan. I mean, I think, women are really at the forefront of finding ways to not just survive, but thrive. And so I think, we really need to challenge the sort of construction of, African women as barefoot and pregnant, right? Stuck in rural areas, kind of struggling away. Because I think, and the movie shows this, right? It's William's mother and sister who are actually the ones who are keeping the family together, right? And who are creating the container for possibility for others. And I think that's really, really important to lift up, because I think, I work with an organization called JASS Associates, and we are global in that we support women's organizing and the strengthening and capacity building of women's leadership in order to effect change in their communities, right? From deep community level all the way through to national policy change. And Malawi is one of the countries that we work in. And, in Malawi, over the last sort of 9 years, we've worked with women in deep rural communities, initially around HIV/AIDS and the meaning of living positively, right, in a healthy way. But women have over the 8 years really developed an infrastructure and network, right, a movement called Our Bodies, Our Lives, that are championing now not just access to quality treatment and healthcare, but other dimensions of community life, including education, including violence against women, including, you know, ensuring that the girl child, right, is safe and does have access to education in a similar way that the boy child is given opportunities to. So I tell that story because it's a Malawian story, but also because I think it's a misnomer. When we see news stories, when we read, you know, about the African continent and, you know, Southern Africa specifically in newspapers or books, women are often invisible. And yet women are the ones, right, who are forging ahead at community level. I mean, there's a whole range of opportunities in urban contexts where women are really taking the lead. I mean, Tanzania this week, right, Magufuli dies, and now there's a woman president in place. And so I think, you know, there are many things that are evolving, many things that are shifting and changing after years, you know, of organizing against a system that's stacked against women. But there's always more to do, right? There's always more to do. I think levels of violence, not just, you know, gender-based violence in the home, but also structural violence in terms of access to housing, water, you know, authoritarian regimes and the violence that come with that, is also something that is really key to address. Over to you, Joanne.
You know, every time it's over to me, you've said everything important to say. So what's left? I mean, I just wanted to make the point. I just wanted to make the point that, and thank you for the question, Alan, that I think one of the challenges that have kind of revealed themselves over the past 20 years since the world committed to universal, basic, and free education is that it's not enough just to get kids into school. And this is true in this country as well. The quality of education is absolutely essential. And so what we've seen in many places, not just sub-Saharan Africa, not Malawi, is a huge increase in the number of kids who are in school, a much stronger focus on things like STEM, right? You hear a lot about that. And yet at the same time, and this is just as true, I think, in New York City as it is in other places, you have kids going to school who come out and they still can't read. So the quality of education and the security of education, the rates of school-related gender-based violence, I think are something that we can't ignore. And there are things that we can do, things we can invest in to stem that tide, to actually address those. And, you know, how do we blend, Alan, the kinds of things you're talking about, investments in STEM, investments in those kinds of things, with actually creating educational environments that are safe, secure, and generative for boys and girls?
I'm sorry, I want to add a point that picks up on something that Wendy raised, because I think it's important to mess up a little bit how it is that we're understanding knowledge. And I want to lift up from the movie the meaning of Indigenous knowledge systems. I think the way that we understand knowledge, particularly given the politics of North-South and the African continent, who produces the knowledge, right? And what knowledge is seen as constituting knowledge. And I think it's important to kind of mess that picture up a little bit, because I think there are Indigenous knowledge systems, and you see that in the movie, right? There are ways of knowing, right, that are innate to a community. And how are those valued as knowledge? How does that, right, feed what constitutes knowledge and what we are subsequently reading in library books, right, about ourselves? What are the stories about ourselves that we have access to that puts us on as players on the world stage, you know, even if it's about rural Malawi? And I think that's one of the interesting things about the movie, because if you come at it from a different angle, that's what William and the Windmill is telling us, right? It's messing with the politics of knowing and knowledge production.
Interesting answer. And I'd like to follow that up with going back to the movie, and I'm going to send this question to Cameron. Films often focus on problems and issues. African-based films tend to portray the region as poor, violent, and corrupt. Is The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind exceptional in that way? And to follow that up, are there opportunities to make media that reflect a different Africa than the ones we see in sort of Hollywood type films?
Thanks. Yeah, no, it's a great question. And it does, I mean, honestly, Shereen said it all. I think it applies here too, in some ways, kind of along with that idea of where does the knowledge come from? What types of knowledge are we prioritizing? I think it kind of mirrors how we tell our stories and who is the storyteller and what are we choosing to idolize and put in the spotlight. As far as William and the Windmill, I think it's not unique, certainly. I think there are elements of it that we've seen in many other films. I think it is kind of remarkable. It's the first film shot in Malawi on that scale. It's, maybe the first experience many mainstream audiences had with Malawi. So the fact that it was done at that scale and in that way, and with a level of intentionality to being true to Malawian stories, to filming it there, to including, filming it on location, there was a level of care that is, unusual for maybe an outside filmmaker coming in to take the time to do that. But that still is not the same as the film and the stories coming from that place and from that community, I think. And, but the good news is, like, there are those films out there. Just because we haven't watched them and seen them, there's a long tradition of, amazing African filmmaking, actually. And it's out there.
Can you name a few?
Yeah, a recent one actually that comes to mind that I was thinking about, because it was actually the first film by a Black female filmmaker to premiere at Cannes, was a film called Atlantics recently. It was about 2 years ago. It was a Senegalese film, and it's sort of a magical surrealist take on development in Senegal, and it has, very spooky elements to it, but also, it's dealing with the inner lives of Black women, women in Senegal. And it's refreshing to see films like that come from perspectives, that just feel deeply rooted in the perspective of that place. I don't have an example from Malawi specifically, but that's one that I would call out. It's just a really amazing film that I would definitely encourage people to check out. But yeah, I think that's where there's still so much opportunity to pay attention to those films and certainly to invest more in them too. It's, they're out there, but they're not made nearly as much as they should be. They're not invested in as much as they should be. They're not watched as much as they should be. For whatever reason, we don't like watching movies with subtitles as much. We don't pay that much attention to it. That's why I think it's one of the other amazing things about William and the Windmill, just that choice to, have the majority of it be in the language of that region. That's unusual on its own. So there are many things that I think, make William and the Windmill stand out as, taking big steps in the right direction, but it's, there's a lot to do there. There's a lot more work still.
Is outside of South Africa, is there any infrastructure for doing films, sound stages and tech equipment to be rented?
Yeah, certainly. A lot of, you might not be surprised which countries it are that have, Nigeria, Kenya, Rwanda actually has a pretty big film scene. So they're all over the continent. There are, and I'm no expert on it. Certainly, there's a lot of resources out there I don't know, but so yeah, Nigeria, Nollywood is one of the biggest film producing industries in the world. It's, maybe second only to Hollywood. I'm not sure whether between Bollywood and not, but I'm pretty sure Nigeria is right up there. So again, just because we're not seeing the films doesn't mean they're not out there. There actually is a lot of resources and filmmakers out there. We just don't happen to be seeing them always. So.
Okay. And Shereen just shared a whole bunch of films in the chat, which we will post on the website for everybody to go chase down.
That's great. I need to watch some of those.
Yeah,
thanks, Shereen. Those look awesome.
This will keep us busy for a lot of nights.
Definitely.
All right. I'm going to keep with things I picked up from the film, and this is a question for Donnie, Andrew, maybe Cameron, you can also comment on this. The windmill William built looks nothing like the massive windmills now being deployed in Europe and the United States. Yet simple, what we would call low tech, really makes a huge difference in people's lives. Is that a sort of a realistic long-term solution for countries like Malawi and other poor regions, or are we really not progressing by introducing this type of technology and allowing the developed countries to continue to move ahead at a furious rate? I don't know if anybody wants to tackle that. Donnie, is this something?
Yeah, sure. I can go first if you want.
Sure.
That's a very good question. When I saw the movie, I saw that as a slap, basically. Because to whoever felt to be slapped, to be slapped, on their face, in the sense that what William offered actually is a very intriguing solution, because he found problems and he found components that can be used to solve the problems that wasn't seen by other people. He found pumps in the junkyard, and then he found something. And then he found the dynamo. That when his friend was asking him to do something with the bike of the science teacher, that was really funny, because it was a learning opportunity for him. Then he realized it, hey, this is something. And then he was asking his friend to do some small experiments. And it turns out this, when he, he pedaled something that is light, it was a learning experience for him. It turned out to be so obviously what he built was not sustainable. I mean, Andrew might have more comment on that in the sense that structurally, wind can be so strong in the sense that his tower might collapse. But at least there is a call that, hey, there is a solution over there that it can be done, and then the rest is just refinement, basically. So this is wind pump is not something new. I mean, the past 600 many years ago, in the 600s AD, is already developed. Mechanisms to turn wind power into mechanisms to draw water from well, and then so it's not a rocket science, basically. So it's a good movie in the sense that the problem is there is solutions, and whoever in power who should be able to do that solution should have done it. So
completely agreed. I think what draws us to William is not the fidelity of the windmill, but the fact that he saw a problem, engaged in self-directed learning, and then developed a solution. And so, that's one of the many solutions he's then gone on to develop. He's recognized now as an inventor globally. And so I think that's the draw, not the quality of the windmill, but the fact that he did it, and he encountered problems, and he overcame those problems to make something that worked.
Cameron, is this something you've seen in your work as well?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that it's the like you're saying, the draw that we see, it's in the human qualities that drive people. And I think with William, like, to me, there's also, it was necessity, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, we say, but it was really that curiosity that was driving him, like, more so than this, like, the necessity was down the line, but that was already in him. Like, all of those elements that were driving him, the curiosity was there. He happened to be in the right place to notice this book sitting on the table or on the shelf, but it wasn't like he was, seeking a solution to a specific problem in that one moment. It was inherent to who he was, to his, his character. And so, yeah, I think that's what the story is really about.
Okay, interesting. We've gotten a question, and I'm trying to understand. I think I can, let me see if I can articulate it. There's also a knowledge education relationship that speaks to diasporas and countries of immigrants who see different manifestations of old knowledge in the family lost because of leaving the home. And we should add that William is now in the United States, even though he's still involved with Africa. He's left Malawi. And with coming with Africans, and they are leaving now in large numbers, in part because of civil war, but also climate change is driving it. There is the potential of rejection of customs as embarrassing, and then lost, and then possibly becoming nostalgic. But I think this goes back to that comment about indigenous knowledge, which is something, it seems like groups that have been displaced, whether it's Native Americans or Africans or people out of Eastern Europe, both reject, and then later generations seem to try and rediscover. I don't know who would like to speak to that. Joanne, do you want to take a first stab at it?
I mean, it's interesting, Alan, because when I think back on 40 years of working on women's rights, and I can think of numbers of initiatives that we supported. I was at the UN Development Fund for Women, of celebrating, recognizing, acknowledging women's indigenous knowledge, traditional knowledge, et cetera, doing books on women inventors from villages. And unfortunately, to some extent, they remain a kind of boutique, very small source of interest, right? And so that is another reason that the film is important, is because it takes that kind of ingenuity that happens locally and broadcasts it. And I think it's important for us to acknowledge that this is happening every day, all day long, all over, right? That there are individuals who are doing what they can with what they have. So yeah, I mean, I don't know, Shereen, maybe you want to add to something?
Yeah, I mean, look, as an African living in the diaspora, and I say that deliberately because I think increasingly, there are Africans in the diaspora who do not see themselves as giving up what they've left behind, but rather furthering the struggles and, holding the sets of issues in the positions and places that they are in, as part of uniting together across a broader spectrum, right? In holding the positioning of the African continent, be it in terms of knowledge, be it in terms of culture, be it in terms of art, be it in terms of, the fabric of life, right? And so I think that there is something very potent about that, particularly in this period, where the meaning of transnational solidarity and the meaning of, Black Lives Matter, as it has reverberated across the globe, is very, very potent and upfront. And so while I do think that, sometimes people do leave contexts because they're too painful and because you want to deliberately turn your back on that context, I think that is a reality that we live with. It's certainly not my reality, and so I can't speak from that positioning. I don't know if any of you are familiar with an essay by Elif Shafak called "What It Means to Belong in Many Places at Once." But in the essay, she talks about how motherlands are castles made of glass, And in order to leave them, you have to break something, a wall, a social convention, a cultural norm, a psychological barrier, a heart. And you always carry that glass shard in your pocket, right? You may not always know that it's there, but when you put your hand onto something, you can get a nick and a cut that reminds you of where it is that you come from. And I've been thinking a lot about that, because I think you don't fully leave the places that are in your blood, in your body, in your heart, in your mind.
So for rich countries like the United States or Western Europe that can attract Shereens and Donnies and Williams and Westernize them to some extent, even though, as you say, they live in many places, we're still stealing them from those countries where they might have done great things. They might have been, leaders of innovators of new industries, government officials. Is it really a mixed bag? Are we on some level doing a disadvantage to these countries?
I mean, I think it depends on how you look at it, and which is why I talk about the diaspora and how it is that people position themselves in relation to where it is that they've come from. I certainly, but I guess I'm mobile, except during this time of COVID. So, I don't see myself as being part of the extractivist industry of the North, right? I see myself as very rooted in the struggles of people in Southern contexts. And particularly on the African continent, because that's where I'm from. But I do think that even on the I think we've got to destabilize the understanding that while people are attracted to the North in some ways, I think COVID has also scrambled that, because structural systems in the North are equally as precarious as they are in Southern context. And I think, if anything, that's one of the things that COVID has taught us. Yes, the infrastructure is larger to shore it up, but I think for the Williams, I think somebody used the phrase earlier, for the Williams in the US, they are equally as adrift, right, as the Williams in Malawi, because of the way that structural systems have been wired. So I think it's up for debate. I also think that, there's a similar dynamic on the African continent. So, I mean, South Africa attracts people from other countries in Africa because of its economic positioning on the African continent. And I say that because I think mobility has always been part of the story, historically. People have always moved. And so I think inviting a broader holding of what mobility means, and how does knowledge flow and how do people move at different times in different places, as opposed to narrowing it so tightly as in the Shereens and the Donnies that have been extracted, right, and are now sitting in a Northern context. And then what does that leave,
All right. I have a question for...
Wait, Alan, yes. Can I add to that?
Sure.
I think there's also something important about what happens with globalization and the way it enables us to see what has been normal as abnormal. I never thought of standing in line as a particularly democratic activity until I was in countries where nobody ever stood in line. Corruption is a big problem in many African countries, but when people have experience seeing less corrupt ways of negotiating, it changes the context for the better. And so I think that we often think about the losses of globalization, but there are also benefits. Not just technology, not just money, but in terms of our way of being in the world.
Wendy, stay on for a second, because you have a question directed towards you. How did you / International Book Bank first find out about Williams' connection to International Book Bank? And to what extent do exemplar stories like these encourage book donations? And are they even still relevant?
Yeah. So for those of you who got a chance to watch my little PowerPoint, you'll see that book donation programs have become much less popular in the last 10 years, and I try and explain why. But the way we found out about William was because, and this goes back to the whole question of media, somebody met William and thought this would be a great book. And there was a book called The Boy Who Harnessed the Wind, and then somebody made a junior high version of it by the same title. And now there is a book for young children called William's Windmill. And that story, people who are trying to raise money for organizations are looking for stories. And it was a very popular story and it was well done. And because we were pretty well organized, we knew where that book came from. And actually, William knew where that book came from. So it was fairly easy.
Okay. We only have a few minutes left. I would love to carry this on for another hour, but we are talking across many time zones here. And some people may have rumbling tummies. I'd sort of like to go around the group and have them talk about sort of what they saw as a central message or the central message they took in from the film. And I think given Cameron's very nice video, which I hope everybody has seen, I think I'd like to start with him.
Thank you. I mean, I think I would take the two films maybe together, since that was kind of the lens that I was really thinking about it a lot through, and sort of this, to me, that's what stands out the most, is those questions around story and storytelling, and the way that telling a story like this is the impact that it has on the viewer, on seeing this story that was so unique and so interesting, but then also those questions around whose story are we hearing, what stories are we missing, and I think that it's just such a beautiful example where we have what is undeniably an inspiring story and a beautiful story, and one that we can take a lot from, and yet it also points to the complications of William's life and the complicated life that he's leading, and that telling his story led him to leave. And so I think that just that kind of juxtaposition of just it being such a wonderful and inspiring story, and yet still pointing us to some of these complicated topics is just a really wonderful opportunity. So that's kind of was my big takeaway.
Would you call this socially conscious filmmaking, or is that something different?
I think I would, sure. I think, these words are hard to define, but I would say it falls under that category. Yeah, I think that in both cases, I think the fiction film and the nonfiction film are both, they have something to say about how our society is organized, and who has power and who doesn't, and what are the factors that can change that. So in both cases, yes.
Okay. Andrew, same question to you, but I'd like you to also think in context of the students that you get to see every day.
To me, the message of this film is trust children. They bring a unique perspective to everything, and children are our most valuable natural resource. And if the more we invest in them, the more we invest in our future. William, it's just amazing what he accomplished. And I'm so glad that this story has gained such popularity, because I think it's representative of the problems and solutions, the problems that our students identify on a daily basis, and their very unique creative approaches to the development of solutions.
And I just want to add, Wendy and I have worked quite a while with Andrew, and he is a gem of a teacher. And I think those are genuine comments that he just made. Donnie, as somebody who's gone through the diaspora and recruits your own students to SUNY New Paltz, how did you relate to the movie?
The one thing that I learned about this, because this is really related to energy, yeah? One thing I really learned is this, even though this is a small movie, it's a big in the quality, of course, yeah. But this truly shows the complexity of this issue relating with the food crisis, renewable energy, and then the intertangle between all of those aspects, the politics, you know, the security, the educations are all in that. Many of them are in the movie, you know. So it's very, very interesting. So I really want to relate this to my students about this, because the energy is not only about the engineering and science and math behind it, but it's also very intertangled, you know, between a lot of factors, not only about you know, natural science itself, but many other factors. So that's one thing I take from this movie.
Okay. Joanne, you're next up. One thing we didn't talk about that I think is something that you're concerned with. We haven't talked about the environmental issue, the fact that these farmers sold their trees, which led to the degradation. So when you look at this movie from your perspective as somebody involved in policy issues around Africa, what message did you walk away with?
I would say community resilience in the face of, exactly as you said, Alan, systems, very large, complex systems, whether it's, you know, climate injustice, political injustice, gender discrimination. In the face of that, how communities join together. And while William is an incredible man, an incredible kid, you know, you see him in the context of a family, a community that survives and that is innovative in the way they survive. So I think that for me was one of the big takeaways.
Shereen, as somebody who has one foot in Africa and one foot in the West, does this movie give you hope, or does it break your heart a bit?
No, always hope. I always lead with hope. I watched the movie first a number of years ago, and then I watched it again a couple of weeks ago, and it made me homesick. You know, just to see, you know, the land, and, you know, just imagine the feel and the breeze, and, you know, the sounds made me homesick. So always lead with hope. I think that anything is possible. Anything is possible, and solutions come from unlikely places. You know, and often women, and often children, but unlikely places.
And for those of us who have never been to Malawi or may never get there, I understand it's a beautiful country. Is that true?
Absolutely stunning. I mean, you know, prior to being here, I worked extensively in the Southern African region and would spend months in Malawi, in rural Malawi. And it's absolutely beautiful. Of course, there's the lake, you know, which is also absolutely stunning, the escarpments where they grow tea. People are incredibly generous and incredibly friendly. And they have the most amazing barbecued fish. It's called chambo. And in Southern Africa, we use the word braai. So braaied chambo is something that you have to have when you're in Malawi, and amazing markets.
So as the Michelin guide would say, worth the detour.
No, worth the actual destination, Alan, not the detour.
And I'm going to leave the last word to Wendy. Wendy, you've done a lot of traveling, both Africa, Eastern Europe. You were a professor of international studies. What message did you walk away with?
You know, the message I really walked away with comes from me as a literary reader. And there are so many stories to be unearthed in any story we engage in. And as we think about ourselves at different stages in life or through different experiences, each time we watch something like a movie or read a book, it's a different experience. And I am just so pleased that the Rosendale Theatre has invited us to have such a multi-layered conversation about this film. And I look forward to other multi-layered conversations. I'm also thinking about how much I've learned from everybody on the Zoom, and I'm so grateful to all of you. So that was my takeaway.
And I want to thank everybody. I was afraid I would get 6 of the same answers, but we have really gotten a lot of perspectives, and it's really been a fascinating conversation. I will remind everybody that we will post these films about Africa on the website. I hope everybody goes, checks them out. The video will be up on the website, I hope soon. And I want to thank everybody for what has really been a fabulous conversation.
And thank you, Alan. I really didn't want to moderate this conversation. I kind of twisted his arm, and he's been great. The other thing that I want to tell viewers is, if you enjoyed this conversation, dig deeper into those curated pieces that we've put online. They're terrific. And I think everyone here would be happy to answer further questions. And don't forget the donate button. All right, thank you all.